Morning, everybody, and hey, let's talk some hockey. Now, I'm gonna add to a playlist that I started last summer, where I profiled every single season in National Hockey League history. This being the first time I've done this on the new set, so it's gonna look completely different than every other video in the series, and yet I've tried to keep it as consistent with the rest of the series as possible. Now, this is for the 2018-2019 season. And I'm aware that that season ended approximately a week ago. But again, everything slots in. We've got it all figured out. And so let's discuss, shall we? The Atlantic Division was won by the President's Trophy winning Tampa Bay Lightning, who sported a record of 62, 16, and 4. And they cruised to tie the record for most wins in the season. Did not manage to break that record. The Boston Bruins are second in the division, 49, 24, and 9. Toronto, 46, 28, and 8. Then you have the line that denotes whether you're in or out of the playoffs, and just below it, the Montreal Canadiens at 44, 30, and 8. So, Boston Montreal is a bad matchup for Boston, and Boston avoids it this year by Montreal missing the playoffs, to which I say thank you to the Montreal Canadiens. Florida, 36, 32, and 14. Buffalo, 33, 39, and 10. Detroit, 32, 40, and 10. And the Ottawa Senators, who were mired in a lot of controversy this past season, 29, 47, and 6 record overall. And a lot of things happened with Melnick, and Erik Karlsson ends up getting traded. That's pretty much the biggest trade of the year. And the Senators appear to be in the state of flux. We'll see as next season rolls along whether or not they stay down here or whether or not they move their way up a bit. Metropolitan Division is won by the Washington Capitals, 48, 26, and 8 record. The Islanders finished second, 48, 27, and 7. They were only 1 point back of Washington, which is good for them, as we're about to see when we get to the playoff part of this video. Pittsburgh, 44, 26, and 12. Feels like they stepped back a bit. Carolina, 46, 29, and 7. Columbus, 47, 31, and 4. And at the trade deadline, Columbus goes all in, acquiring Matt Duchene, acquiring Ryan Dzingel, and giving up draft picks in order to do so, with the idea that we need to win now being the theme of the day. Below the playoff line, Philadelphia, 37, 37, and 8, despite a heroic effort by Carter Hart and the team. They fade late in the season and fall out of contention. The Rangers, 32, 36, and 14, continue their upheaval. The New Jersey Devils, 31, 41, and 10. So a large drop for the Devils from the wildcard team they were the season before. The good news for them, they win the draft lottery, and they get Jack Hughes out of that draft lottery. The good news for the Rangers is they finish second in that draft lottery, and they acquire Capo Caco with that pick. Now, out in the West, Central Division is won by Nashville, 47, 29, and 6. And the surprising thing in the Central is that only one team has 100 points and just barely gets there. Winnipeg, 47, 30, and 5 is second. St. Louis, as expected, third at 45, 28, and 9. But what's not expected is that they are the last place team in the league in January. They started turning things around in December, but not well enough, and they were win one, lose one, win one, lose one, and that went on for a while, and it looked like they were going to miss the playoffs. Maybe they'd tear things apart, and they didn't have to. As you can see, this is a jersey I hadn't worn in the entire series. Dallas, 43, 32, and 7. They put together a solid season, but in reality, part of the reason they make the playoffs isn't necessarily that they're better, it's that it's easier to make the playoffs in the West this year. Colorado, 38, 30, and 14. Don't let that record fool you. Cale Makar's added towards the end of the year to that roster, and Colorado looks like the real deal. Below the playoff line, Chicago, 36, 34, and 12. They as well look like they could have got in, much like Philly, but faded late. Minnesota, 37, 36, and 9 are noteworthy because Minnesota was basically looking like a playoff team right up through the first half of the season, and then things just fell apart for them. Pacific Division is won by the Calgary Flames, who finished first in the West for the first time in over 20 years. 50, 25, and 7 record. They are one of only two teams with 50 wins in the league this year. San Jose second at 46-27-9. The Vegas Golden Knights in their second season in the NHL, 43-32-7. They take a little bit of a step back in their second season, but they had Mark Stone at the deadline, and there's reason to believe that going into next season that they could very well be up near the top of that division again. Arizona 39-35-8. I didn't put in the line between them, but I'm going to do it now. There's the playoff line. So Arizona fades towards the end of the year. They look like they might get the wild card spot that ends up going to Colorado, and there's reason to believe that this team could actually be a playoff team next year. Vancouver has a surprisingly strong 35-36-11 record. They finish ahead of teams like Ottawa, Detroit. They finish ahead of Buffalo, New Jersey, the Rangers, LA, Edmonton, and Anaheim. But there's still a perception that these guys aren't going anywhere and this is all going to fall apart. And we'll see next season whether or not that's the case. So Vancouver finishes ahead of Anaheim with their 35-37-10 record. The Oilers 35-38-9. And the LA Kings, who have tremendous trouble scoring, 31-42-9. Anaheim may very well have ended up getting a playoff spot if they had fired the coach a little bit earlier in the season than they did. Randy Carlyle finds himself turfed after they had lost what felt like 40 in a row. And for somebody who wasn't hating on the Ducks this year like he had in previous years, was torn on it. Now, the playoffs are very, very interesting this year in that if you won your division, you lost in the first round. The first example and most dramatic example is the Tampa Bay Lightning, who win 62 games in the regular season, and in the postseason they win nothing. They looked great in the first period against Columbus in Game 1. They looked great in the third period of Game 4 against Columbus. They didn't look good anywhere in between. Columbus wins 4 straight, and that's your first upset. The Boston Bruins managed to eke out a 7-game victory over the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are tough to Boston every time, but what people remember is that Boston wins it. So they're tough series, and they fight it out, and it's close, but in the end, Boston emerges victorious. And for Toronto fans who might think that I wouldn't understand this, as a Boston fan who's watched Montreal do it numerous times, believe me, I understand. The Washington Capitals, in defending their Stanley Cup championship, do not get out of the first round either. They are upset by the Carolina Hurricanes in 7. So the Hurricanes, a team that very rarely makes the playoffs, but when they do, they manage to go on a run every time. The New York Islanders stun the Pittsburgh Penguins and most prognosticators, like myself, by taking Pittsburgh out in 4. So the New York Islanders, who when John Tavares signs with Toronto were left for dead, bring in Lou Lamoriello, they bring in Barry Trotz to coach, and it's a success story, and then some. So the New York Islanders knock out Pittsburgh in the first round, and 2 teams in the Metro who've won the last 3 Stanley Cups combined are both out in round 1. We will have a brand new champion this year. Out west, the Dallas Stars stun the Nashville Predators in 6 in the first round. And you kind of get the feeling this year that Nashville's kind of struggling to stay ahead of everybody else, which is why, as I'm recording this, there's a lot of talk about which free agents might go to Nashville, and PK Subban was traded out after that season was done. The Winnipeg Jets, picked by many in the preseason to win the Stanley Cup, myself included, loses in the first round to St. Louis in 6. And that's another upset. So far you 1, 2, 3, 4 upsets in the first round. We're not done. The Calgary Flames, they won their division, which means they're out in the first round against Colorado Avalanche in 5. Calgary destroys Colorado in Game 1. It looks like this could be a lopsided series, and then Colorado proceeds to win 4 in a row. The Vegas Golden Knights and San Jose Sharks. Vegas gets out to a 3-1 series lead. San Jose wins games 5 and 6, and then game 7 it is complete and total chaos as they call a 5-minute major on a play against Cody Eakin, where Joe Pavelski gets hurt. A referee doesn't see the play, makes the call based on the result, not based on what he saw, but based on the result of what he saw. And that referee doesn't work the rest of the playoffs as a result. And the NHL will later, after these playoffs are over, decide to change the rules so that this cannot happen again. So we're through the first round. Now into round two. We're not done with controversy. But in the East, Columbus faces Boston for the first time. Columbus in the second round for the first time in their history. It was a close series, but in the end, Boston emerges victorious in 6 because Tuukka Rask stood on his head. If not for Rask, Columbus may very well have gone as far as I wouldn't be surprised if they'd gone to the final if they knocked out Boston. The New York Islanders swept Pittsburgh and then got swept by Carolina in the second round in 4 games. So stunning result with that one. St. Louis in the West, they hold on and win a 7-game series against the Dallas Stars. San Jose, again, courts controversy against Colorado. There is an offside goal decided by a player being offside who technically wasn't a part of the play at all. Regardless, it means that a goal doesn't count that probably should have. And so while San Jose wins it in 7, there were a lot of people who will discuss this controversy for a long time. So there's only one upset in round 2. So a lot of the wild card and a lot of the underdog stories are kind of done away with in round 2, which sadly is usually the case in hockey. Round 3, Boston. So Carolina, they swept the Islanders. The Islanders swept Pittsburgh. So what happens to Carolina? Boston sweeps them, takes them out in 4, which means that Boston's going to the Stanley Cup Finals, and everybody says this means Boston's going to get swept because that's what's happened the whole playoffs. Like, that's the thing. St. Louis, they score another upset. San Jose, worn down throughout these playoffs, having played 7 games in both of the previous 2 series. St. Louis uses a lot of physicality and punishes the San Jose Sharks and win the series in 6. And it felt like San Jose was wearing down as the series wore along. And St. Louis goes to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time in decades. And a fan base that had suffered for those decades collectively holds their breath thinking maybe this is the year. In the finals, Boston wins Game 1 4-2, holding serve. But in Game 2, St. Louis wins 3-2 in overtime. Boston, in overtime in a Stanley Cup Final, doesn't usually go well. Game 3, Boston wins on the road 7-2. And again, people are planning parade routes in Boston. But hold up. Game 4, St. Louis wins 4-2. And then St. Louis goes to Boston and wins their second out of 3. They win 2-1. So now all St. Louis has to do is win 1 game and they win the Stanley Cup. They lose at home against Boston 5-1 in Game 6. They are 6-7 at home in the playoffs in 2019, and yet they are your Stanley Cup champions as they win Game 7 on the road, again in Boston, 4-1. And it's impressive for a lot of reasons. It's impressive because Boston at home was deadly all year. And it's impressive because St. Louis ties a record with their 10th win on the road in the playoffs. And I don't see anybody ever breaking that record because you have to be so inept at home. But it is an impressive record. Now, coming out of this season, your first team All-Stars, Alex Ovechkin on the left wing for the Capitals, Connor McDavid at center for the Oilers, Nikita Kucherov on right wing for the Tampa Bay Lightning. On the blue line, Mark Giordano, who has a career year at age 35 for Calgary, Brent Burns of the San Jose Sharks, Andrei Vasilevsky of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Second team All-Stars, Brad Marchand, Boston Bruins, has his career year as well with 100 points. Sidney Crosby at center from the Penguins, Patrick Kane on right wing from the Chicago Blackhawks, and on the blue line, John Carlson of the Washington Capitals and Victor Hedman of the Tampa Bay Lightning. In net, Ben Bishop of the Dallas Stars. Now your award winners, and this is where there's more controversy. Nikita Kucherov wins the Hart, which means that he was viewed as being the MVP of the league by sports writers. And he wins the Ted Lindsay Award, which means that hockey players voted him the best player in the league as well. So while there's a lot of debate about whether or not he should have won it, basically when both the writers and the players agree, this guy's probably the best and most important player in the league, I can't be in a position to argue. The Vezina Trophy went to Andrei Vasilevsky, which continued the theme that the Tampa Bay Lightning won all these awards, including the President's Trophy, and they were the first ever President's Trophy winner to not get a win in a playoff game. So that's the kind of record you don't want. Norris Trophy went to Mark Giordano, as mentioned, of the Calgary Flames, who definitely had a career year. Elias Pettersson wins the Calder for the Vancouver Canucks. He had 10 goals in his first 10 games. That excitement continued throughout the season, even though his scoring stats definitely trailed off towards the end of the year. But he played well enough for long enough that he was their MVP. And definitely, in my eyes, was deserving of the Calder, although Blues fans will tell you it should have gone to Binnington. And if the vote had been conducted after the playoffs, Binnington would have won it. But these awards are voted on before the playoffs. The Selke Trophy goes to Ryan O'Reilly of the St. Louis Blues. Alexander Barkov walks away with the Lady Byng Trophy, which means he really can't be called like underrated all the time anymore because he's getting awards votes, which means people know he's out there. And it's good because the Florida Panthers, they could be a team to watch next year. Jason Zucker wins the King Clancy Trophy. The Masterton is won by Robin Lehner, who gives a very moving speech at the awards show after winning. Barry Trotz wins the Jack Adams for Coach of the Year. The Art Ross Trophy goes to Nikita Kucherov because he had 128 points and was fantastic. The Jennings Trophy, Robin Lehner and Thomas Greiss of the New York Islanders, as the New York Islanders go from the worst defensive team in the league to the best in a year. Very, very rare that you see that kind of thing happen. The Conn Smythe goes to Ryan O'Reilly, who scores very key goals in the Stanley Cup final and raises his profile tremendously considering he'd been traded out of Buffalo, and that was after Buffalo got him from Colorado. And O'Reilly just fits in St. Louis in a manner that he didn't really fit in Buffalo or Colorado for the most part. Your playoffs leaders in goals. Couture, 14. Assists, Krug and Pietrangelo. They both have 16. And points, Marchand and O'Reilly both have 23. Your wins leader, Jordan Binnington, with 16, which is also a brand new rookie record. So as much as Binnington would love to have won the Calder, he probably enjoyed that Stanley Cup just a little bit more. So there you go, the 2019 season, and the St. Louis Blues adopt the song Gloria along the way. And I never thought I'd see the day that Laura Branigan was played during the Stanley Cup Finals, but here we are. And, little kid in me that had monster crush on Laura Branigan, that was kind of the fun part, even though I didn't necessarily enjoy the part where they knocked out both the Dallas Stars and the Boston Bruins. But it's a nice story, and it's nice to see St. Louis on top for the first time. And it's the first time in this series I got to wear St. Louis gear. Maybe next year, when I add to this playlist, I'll be wearing somebody else's jersey that I never wore before in this playlist as well. So the blue jersey curse is done. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And if you didn't watch this playlist last summer, good news. The playlist is still intact, and I've just added to it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.